citizens with high levels of education are more tolerant, more engaged in politics, and have a better understanding of democracy. So we have the component of understanding and tolerance or values in this regard. Mattes and Mugugu find a positive but weak impact of education on the ability to form critical opinions and evaluate political processes, but they only they do not find a correlation between educational participation and more widespread democratic attitudes. And
now, excuse me. Yeah? Now you can share the screen. Excuse me. You can. Yeah. Thank you. Great.
Is it working? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Just
Thank
try
you.
to organize myself.
Right.
Right. Okay. So again, coming from the general question of the correlation or the relationship between education and democracy, I was trying to point to some studies that dealt with the inherent logic of this relationship, and there are some who find explanations and some also find some contradictions. And the last study that I wanted to present is the one of D, who critically notes that there are arguments for even a negative influence of higher education and civic engagement in non-democratic countries. For example, that higher levels of education could lead individuals to perceive higher opportunity costs for the time spent on political activities, or to view their voting behavior as meaningless, or their voting as a meaningless act without with just a very low impact. Besides the assumed positive effect of higher education levels in general, civic education is, of course, especially relevant when talking about how education contributes to democratization. Therefore, I want to just briefly present you some findings on the role of civic education, and I limit myself here to findings on civic education in non-democratic countries. Of course, there's a much broader literature on global north countries, which are of course also not 100% democratic, but this is another question. A very important study in this regard is the one of Breton et al., who show for Zambia that civic education has a positive effect, but these were mainly limited to privileged segments of the population, and that the impact was mainly on citizens' knowledge and values and less on their political behavior. Finkel et al. Examined public civic education programs in Kenya and claimed significant long-term effects on the variables related to civic competence and engagement, though less consistent effects on democratic values. And Baye find limitations of the positive impact of political and ethical education on Ethiopian citizens on their active demand for democratic governance. So again, a very unclear picture. Even more relevant for my research are the studies that also deal specifically with civic education programs provided by external actors, and the literature mainly focuses on USAID programs in this regard. There's one study of Blair from 2003 that shows that USAID programs of civic education for adults in the Dominican Republic, in Poland, and South Africa made the participants to significantly participate more in local politics and to somewhat lesser extent also in politics in general. There's also evidence that non-elites may benefit more from such programs. However, overall gains in participation tended to be rather modest. Finkel used their exhaustive survey on the effects of the entire democracy portfolio of USAID in an instrumental variable approach to control confounding processes, which distinguishes their study from previous studies. And the analysis produced for one major result, which shows that USAID programs in recipient countries had a clear and consistent impact on democratization in different democracy indices. Another study by Allison shows again the contrary. She deals with democracy promotion of USAID programs again in Bolivia, and she especially deals with civic education replicators in the city of El Alto, meaning young adults who were trained by the US democracy assistance programs to promote civic education amongst the population. And she argues that despite these programs' emphasis on producing subjects who are governable, replicators are engaged in complex negotiations regarding the form and the content of democracy assistance, and continue to enact political practices that donors might rather think that these are illiberal or even anti-democratic. So against this backdrop, it cannot be assumed that every education measure automatically brings about a boost to democratization. And there are several reasons for that. First, democratization processes are always multidimensional, and especially inherent internal processes that can only be supported but not initiated by external actors. Moreover, education in general, but also civic education in particular, is confronted with many other challenges in the context of external democracy promotion. And these challenges are, for example, the gigantic deficits in the educational systems, a low literacy rate, a lack of knowledge of possible variants of social order, and so on. Furthermore, political education activities in the relevant countries are often subject to narrow thematic, content-related, and methodological constraints. For example, the basic didactic principles of civic education are sometimes in great conflict with the pedagogical and didactical traditions in the recipient countries. And finally, it is in the nature of things that authoritarian governments are resistant towards any democratically connoted interference. So despite the broadly accepted consensus on the importance of education for the individual political participation, as well as for the sustainable political development of a country, it is indeed still unclear how synergy effects between education and democracy promotion can be created, and which concrete formal and non-formal education measures are conducive to the objectives of external democracy promotion. And this finding in turn led me to the following overarching research question of my dissertation project, which reads, which educational measures with the aim of democracy promotion are being pursued by various development and foreign policy actors, and how can these approaches be systemized with regard to external democracy promotion in non-democratic contexts and transitional societies? Very broad. This is why I try to narrow it down to a different subproject about which I'm going to talk later. First, before that, I want to point your attention to the theoretical framework. There are several theoretical explanations of the connection between education in general and civic education in particular on the one hand, and democracy on the other hand, especially in the framework of international cooperation. And these theories are coming from different disciplines as well, which is why I'm probably the reason why I deal with this topic, because I have these both disciplinary backgrounds, political science and education sciences, and this is also why this project is inherently interdisciplinary. Theory-wise, I consequently deal with different theories from these two disciplines, and they can be distinguished in mainly two pillars. The first pillar is education democratization, and the second pillar is external democracy promotion. And I'm trying to introduce some of the theories in the following slides, distinguished into these two sections. In political science, the explanations for the relationship between education and democratizations come mainly from transformation research. In most transformation theories, the respective scholars did not distinguish between education in general and political education in particular, at least not explicitly. One reason for that is that the meaning of the term education is manifold, can equally mean the activities of specific institutions such as schooling. Education can also, or is sometimes also equated with specific results of education, such as the literacy rates or knowledge, but also specific political competencies. So these are rather political science theories, but they have no clear understanding of education. However, I deem that these transformation theories present important theoretical explanations for the relationship between education and democratization, which is why I will anyways present just some basic ideas and we'll try to figure out especially what is the role of education in these rather political theories. So first of all, modernization theory, more generally, system theoretical approaches are very prominent in this field of research, and they see, or respective scholars see, a close connection between education and the economy. Here, high economic growth is based on educated populations, understood both as a precondition and a consequence of democratization. Then we have structuralist theories, which see education as a power resource for elites in relationship to the civil society, or as a means to overcome these power structures. Then we have actor theoretical approaches in transformation research, which particularly emphasize the level of education of elites in the context of rational choice theory, for example. And finally, we have cultural theory approaches in which education is seen as a key resource or medium of value transmission and building social capital. In contrast to these political science theories in which education is rather assumed to be a given fact, educational science is more concerned with the question of how education has to be in order to have the desired effects of external democracy promotion. And this perspective is particularly important since, as I said, the empirical studies are not having or coming to uniform results. One of the best known representatives of educational or pedagogical perspectives on education and democracy is the US educator and philosopher John Dewey, of course. He believed that democracy is a way of life determined by democratic self-determination and solidarity, and he was convinced that children should get to know democracy as early as possible, which is why he saw formal educational institutions as the key instrument for the formation and the strengthening of a democratic society. Therefore, he argued it needs the introduction of democratic methods in the classroom and the social organization of the school. Furthermore, I want to make reference to Paulo Freire, who used the example of Brazil. Okay.
Only. Yeah.
I will just continue, maybe. Someone. Okay. Paulo Freire thought that education contributes to critical consciousness, which is a prerequisite for democratic transformation, based on the identification of social injustices. And he was convinced that it rather needs dialogue and action-oriented pedagogical approaches, in contrast to the prevailing bankers concept in Brazil. And the last, finally, the research on civic education and political didactics seeks to explain the relationship between education and democracy by shedding light on the democracy promoting effects of field-related education, so the politische Bildung in German. It thereby focuses on the tension between didactics, methodologies, factors determining teaching, and the scientific background in grounding in political sciences. And respective scholars discuss under various buzzwords such as civic education, democracy learning, education for sustainable development, and global learning, which educational goals, competency models, or even which kind of relationship to the mother discipline of political science are the best to enable learners to perform as citizens in democracy. And in this German language discourse, there are primarily two models of political competence, which has been advanced to substantiate these goals of civic education, and they point out that it basically needs the ability to judge, the ability to act, knowledge, and democratic attitudes and motivations. And by contrast, there are also other representatives who are more in favor of the so-called term of so-called democracy learning, and they particularly emphasize the action orientation. They further dissolve the subject relatedness of civic education and see above all the need of the formation of a democracy competence, which goes beyond general cognitive skills and includes also the effective moral attitudes. But this idea of democracy competence, however, is rejected by representatives of the classical civic education as it is considered to not sufficiently be grounded in political science. In some, civic education and didactics try to explain the contribution of education to democratization by the competencies developed based on specific educational settings and methods. The second theoretical strand, as I just said, to which I would like to refer in order to understand the relationship between education and democratization, are the concepts of external democracy promotion. And other than the beforehand mentioned theories, it is here taken into account that this education can be provided also by external actors. Scholars coming from this strand have paid little attention so far to education, apart from the studies that I just mentioned. As a result, there are no conceptual works on this topic. However, I try to draw some conclusions for education from the literature, which is what I will just present you in the following slides. Overall, one can say that there is no general theory of democracy promotion. Comparative studies on strategic or strategies, courses, and effects of external democracy promotion are empirically insufficiently saturated and therefore cannot be theoretically generalized, according to Merkel. Nevertheless, there have been various approaches to scientifically conceptualize external democracy promotion. One very common differentiation is drawn between direct and indirect external democracy promotion. Direct external democracy promotion in this regard means that the activities are targeting directly the political system, whilst indirect external democracy promotion pursues primarily other goals such as economic growth and intends to support democratization as a second step. Carrasas, a very prominent scholar, framed this differentiation slightly differently, and he distinguished between the developmental and the political approach of external democracy promotion, whilst the political approach sees democratization as a process of political struggle, which is why aid is directly targeting the core of political processes and institutions such as elections or political parties. And the developmental approach has a broader notion of democracy and democratization, and consequently the aid is or takes place in a wider range of sectors in the political but also in the socioeconomic realm. Turning back to education, so most scholars do not directly refer to education in these theoretical aspects. However, civic education seeks to increase the democratic literacy, acceptance of democratic value, and to foster democratic behavior through programs vis-a-vis the civil society. It can be understood as a battle of minds and be assigned to the direct external democracy promotion or the political understanding of the external democracy promotion. And the more classical development cooperation in the education sector, meaning basic, primary, and secondary education or early childhood education, then presents more the indirect and developmental approach to external democracy promotion. Moreover, there's also something in between. So education can also appear in non-political and non-education sector related programs, for example, in trainings for staff in the health sector, in the infrastructure sector or energy sector. And these programs can also contribute to democracy promotion by promoting democratic, legal, and administrative governance standards through the trainings or capacity building programs. And this kind of education is called the so-called functional cooperation. And this is apparent, can be like put in between these two poles of direct and indirect or political and developmental external democracy promotion. Another differentiation in external democracy promotion literature is made between bottom-up and top-down approaches, which is quite easy to understand, I guess. So bottom-up is targeting civil society and can encompass, for example, a training and further education in strategy or management for NGOs, scholarship programs, or voter education. And top-down is then targeting the political elites or the government and is trying to raise awareness on good governance, or it's about advising in or technical support in election and constitutional coaching. Then another distinction again is made between negative and positive instruments of democracy promotion. for example, proposed by Bernal. Positive instruments are those that give the target country an incentive to take democratization steps on its own, while negative instruments involve the threat and implementation of penalties in the event of undesirable developments. Negative measures of democracy promotion are considered ineffective and counterproductive. And it has been recognized that external pressure and interventionist programs tend to result in rather superficial formal institutionalization, whereas the entrenchment of democracy requires partners who are themselves interested in change and convinced of the democratic reforms. And now, as education in general, or Bildung as we understand it in German, and civic education in particular, cannot be forced or imposed, but to unfold its effect, it even requires the acceptance, but also the cooperation and the active participation of the target groups. One can say that education is a positive measure of external democracy promotion. Then there are other scholars who try to dissolve this dichotomous distinction between positive and negative instruments. I will not go further into detail, but they can also assume that education appears under the terms of persuasion, knowledge and technology transfer, socialization, or social influence and dialogue in external democracy promotion. Finally, there are also scholars who are more specific about civic education, for example, Bush, who describes civic education as a regime-compatible and not measurable democracy promotion approach. The measurability simply implies that the existence of quantitative and country-level indicators which can document a country's progress or failure on a specific dimension. And this is in line with the finding that educational success and its effects are generally very difficult to measure apart from enrollment rates or dropout rates, for example. And the regime compatibility of programs then neither foster the political competition or mobilizes civil society groups. Instead, regime-compatible programs have a low profile and are perceived by target leaders as unlikely to threaten their imminent survival by causing regime collapse or overthrow. And this is due to the fact that in the context of regime-compatible programs, external actors often even cooperate directly with the incumbent actors in the target countries, as is usual in bilateral or multilateral state development cooperation. However, what is a little bit difficult about about Bush differentiation is that she does not specifically or precisely say what she understands as civic education. For example, the author places youth programs in the category of regime incompatible democracy promotion measures, and this demonstrates just the diverse and manifold nature of civic education programs and the lack of a clear understanding, because youth programs, of course, can also be educational. So in sum, these theoretical considerations on the relationship of education and democratization on the one hand, and on the use of education in external democracy promotion, it becomes obvious that there is still a large research gap at the interface of external democracy promotion and international education and cooperation in the Global South. One problem is that the role of education in general for democracy promotion is not considered in the literature of external democracy promotion. Then civic education is not uniformly understood or defined. The logics of effects of education and the logic of the instruments are not theoretically thought together. And there's, of course, a missing link between the theoretical approaches and the disciplines. So to tackle these problems and against the backdrop of the lack of systemizing approaches and the enormous scope of the question that I just mentioned beforehand, my project tries to address the overarching research questions within a publication-based dissertation project with several sub-projects focusing on different parts and different aspects. I am planning to conduct a research or a quantitative analysis of the ODA payments and try to identify patterns between democracy promotion and education ODA. Then I'm working for the NGO that supports school partnerships between Tanzanian or Eastern African, I have to say, and German schools. I also try to investigate how Demokratielernen or democracy learning is implemented in the context of these North-South school partnerships. Then I have the study which deals with the German political foundation's approaches to external democracy promotion through education in Tanzania, which is about which I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail later. And then my master thesis dealt with German schools abroad as a democracy or democratic learning site, and it was also a qualitative study. And in the whole project, then I will try to think all these results together. But until I'll be able to do that, I will first have to conduct all these studies. And at the moment, I'm in the middle of the third one, about which I'm going to tell you a little bit more now. So the party-affiliated political foundations represent a central actor in shaping the specific foreign policy profile of Germany. So they have very specific German thing, although there are already other foundations which are built almost similar to the German foundations in the UK and the US. But still, it's a very specific thing about Germany. They were originally created as institutions for civic education and democracy promotion at home. However, the foreign work of political foundations now accounts for the greater part of the activities, and their educational work of the political foundations is explicitly directed towards external democracy promotion. So this is their factual mandate. By the global establishment and strengthening of democratic orders based on the rule of law, support for sustainable economic development, the support for, of the formation and enrichment of open and competitive societies, the fight against poverty, and so on. And in all of these areas, the foundations use different educational activities such as conferences, workshops, seminars, publication, and exchanges to support external democracy promotion or their actual goals. And sometimes these activities are more dialogue oriented, sometimes they are more directed towards knowledge transfer. This is what we know so far. And although there's only very scarce literature from a pedagogical or educational perspective on the political foundations, one can say, according to Ohlig and Giesemann, that the work is a distinct variant of international educational work. And there are several reasons for that. So mainly because they are political in two ways. They deal with political or civic education. So the content is political as such, but they are also political because they are party affiliated and they have their specific ideological background. Then they are actors in the inter and transnational space. They are also called quangos because they are not NGOs, but they are also non-state actors. So they're a very specific construct. And they do non-formal civic education for adults from the government to the grassroots level, so very diverse target group, although I have to say that the differentiation between target group and partners is also a very specific difficulty when talking about their educational work. Without mentioning all the references in detail, I tried to summarize the state of the literature regarding the work of the German political foundations on this slide. So the existing literature takes either no educational perspective, or is only descriptive, or puts a spotlight only on certain education activities or evaluations. So a lot of, or a much broader literature exists for also for the localization of the political foundations in EU or German foreign policy. So they are coming from an IR or international relations perspective. Then most of the literature is written from a donor side. And what is found out in the literature is that the clarification of the understanding of democracy within the foundations and its discussion between the foundations and their partners is definitely needed, as there's no clarity behind this, and that the effectiveness of Western civic education methods and formats and so on in non-Western contexts is still unclear. So there's in some just no understanding of the logic behind of the work of the educational work of the German political foundations, if there is one. This translates again in the following research question, which is guiding this sub-study, and it reads, what is the rationale or the democracy-making theory of the political foundations that manifests itself in how the foundations conceptualize their educational activities and democracy promotion. So it's not about their practices, it's not about their effects, it's just about their understanding and their conceptualization of the activities. And this translates again into two sub-questions. First, what is the idea of how civic education can contribute to democratization in non-democratic countries, especially provided by external actors? So we have the understanding of democratization and education and democratization, and we have the understanding of external democracy promotion. And then how must this education then look like to have these desired effects? And this is relating to the understanding of education. Yeah, the research design is it's an exploratory single case study in Tanzania, as was already mentioned. The data collection took part in the expert interviews, which were taking place in from October 2021 to June 2022 in Tanzania mainly, and some interviews were conducted online. I conducted 18 interviews, about 1,300 minutes, and mainly with, or 12 were with the employees of the foundations themselves, and 6 with their partner organizations from all over the political spectrum. And I also conducted 4 background interviews with different practical but also academic experts in this field. And the data analysis will be a qualitative content analysis, deductive, inductive, content structuring, and with the aim of developing a typology towards the understanding or this rationale, which was just mentioned in the research question. My hypotheses are that for the understanding of democracy and democratization, which is also one category, that depending on the understanding of transformation and democracy in general and in the target country context, external democracy promotion translates into different educational activities. However, from what I know from literature, all foundations rather pursue an actor or lead-centered approach, which is what I try to confirm or not in the context of Tanzania. Then regarding the understanding of civic education, I have the hypothesis that political education work in non-democratic contexts requires different approaches than in democratic contexts, and that the approaches of the classic civic educations is more prominent than the democracy learning, so the pedagogical approach to it. And then regarding the understanding of democracy promotion in total, I have the hypothesis that civic education in external democracy promotion is in line with the principles, or best able to be in line with the principles of international cooperation, such as the ownership, the cooperation at eye level, context specificity, and the sustainability, do no harm principle, and so on. From, I don't know exactly what time it is, so maybe someone can give me just a short signal whether I should continue with the interview excerpt that I brought, or just go directly to the preliminary results, because I lost a little bit track of time.
Well, you still have time, you know, at least 10 minutes or so.
Okay, perfect.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's then it's doable. So yeah, I brought you 4 excerpts from the interviews that I conducted. I only brought those that I conducted with people, or with English speaking or Swahili people, Swahili speaking people, not those in German, because of the audience that I was expecting here. This is also why these are not completely representative for the study. However, I think we can still draw some very interesting conclusions from that. And I will just try to read them out and say how I was pursuing with these interviews. By bringing them together, they understand each other. They know these are the do's and the don'ts in the mainland, and these are the do's and the don'ts in Zanzibar. It is really helpful. And also the same applies to political parties. Different political parties, we have CCM, the ruling party, Chadema, the most strong opposition party. By bringing them together during early sessions, it is so difficult for them to mingle, but as the time passes by, they come to realize that they are Tanzanians. It is only that they are subscribing to difficult this has to be different, of course, different ideologies. That was kind of important, very, very important, actually. Okay, that is one of the objectives, to build the network, the networking. So here we see already that there's a very democratic or a pedagogical approach behind that. It is about the experience of pluralism and the experience of democratic cooperation, no matter from which part of the political spectrum you're coming from. The next one is we live in a country with, we have the government, we have decision makers, we have citizens, and normally these politicians, let me call it politicians, not decision makers, some of them, they use these whatever positions for themselves because they exploit the ignorance of the others, because people don't know that they are supposed to do what and what, you know. So people like those need to be told that you are here to serve the people and not be served, and this is for what, but we have also to enlighten those people as well. If it is not there, then it is our task, when you do your trainings, at least let people know that these leaders, they are not there for themselves. So they have to take them into task. They have to question, don't only complain that we don't have good politics, we don't have these, because if you are a citizen, you have the obligation, you have a duty, so things like that. So you have to make them understand whatever decision you are making is politics. In this regard, we have an understanding of democracy as a way of life, which was already mentioned by Dewey, for example. And education is also enlightenment of one of another. So we have different aspects of the understanding of democracy or education. Of civic education as democracy of a way of life, and as an enlightenment of one of another. And the third one is, I think, to keep on, because here the issue is the concept democracy. What is democracy? Good governance. What is good governance? So democracy can be defined differently in Germany, in the USA, in Uganda. So for political foundations, they have to localize. They have to define it in regards to the local context, in the regards to the country context. If democracy means putting on long skirts, then they have to at least go. Although there are still principles or standard principles of good governance. So what we can still do is to keep on raising awareness for the government leaders to understand the concept itself, because sometimes we may be blaming government leaders. They are not doing this, they are not. But are you sure that they have really been oriented on the good governance thing or on the democracy thing? We are not sure. So I think it is just that we keep working on training them the concepts, yes, so that they understand, they are aware. For example, through our programs after the training, you just find the participants come and thank you, like, you know what, I didn't even know my limitations as a leader. I didn't know that that was also my responsibility. I think it's just keep on educating, providing education. And here you see that democracy is also seen as a concept in education. So it's a very conceptual and in political science grounded approach to education. And the last one, as a foundations, we sit at the backside of the whole discussion. We are not necessarily become the ones who are going to be vocal about policy issues in the country, but because we empower them, we empower our partners to do that. We want them to be the mouth about this discussion. And so as a foundation, people may feel like, okay, what are you doing? But to us, it is to empower the partners. And the partners have to be able to say what they are supposed to say, how they feel it. And so with those kind of things, it is very easy for us to just be part of the process, but the speakers will be our partners, which is very obvious in this regard. The understanding of democracy promotions through the support of the partners and an understanding of education as capacity development. And these ideas are then just as examples. Of course, I have a lot more. These examples are then assigned into the categories, as I just said. So I have a deductive, inductive approach, and I'm at the moment at the point where I'm trying to develop the inductive categories from the understanding of civic education, the understanding of transformation, and the understanding of external democracy promotion to condense them in the end into types. And so far, I already realized that there are some patterns, and I could identify the provision of knowledge and information as one key understanding, which relates to an actor-centered approach, which is more one-way or hierarchical, and the input that the foundations are giving is more content-wise. Then we have also a more dialogue focused understanding, which includes also the representation, discussion, and networking aspects. Here it's more systematic approach to transformation through the cooperation on eye level according to the needs of the partners. And here's the input rather the resources of the foundations. I'm not yet that far that I can present you a lot more of these types. Maybe they will also change during the process, which is very likely. But as you can see, I'm expecting also a very action-centered approach from what I know from the interviews that I conducted. Yes, and that's it. This is the literature. It's quite a lot. If someone interested, I can share that with him or her. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Louise, for this wonderful presentation. And this is already part of your thesis, well, defense, as it were. But I'm sure that people here will help you to, you know, put things actually in perspective, of course, and give you probably different orientations, some help, some challenges, whatever is fit. So I would like to ask participants for questions, comments. But definitely it has been a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. So you may raise your hand or just click on the golden hand here on your screen to raise your question, ask your question, or make a contribution. I don't seem to see a hand. So EDP, would you like to say what that's again in full? Because it's so prominent, the pair. EDP.
Sorry, I didn't understand. EDP is just an abbreviation of external democracy promotion. It is just to...
Okay, great. Yeah, I can see a question from Afiz. Afiz, please unmute.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for the coordination, and I really thank our presenter for trying to bridge the gap between democracy and education. But my question is that in our presentation, he said an individual can reason along within the democratic values. So my question is that democracy values, or what values does democracy implies or has that other factors of theory of state does not have? That's on democracy, on democratic values. That's number one. And number two is that in the light of spirit of capitalism and class, I mean, creating classes in the society, what can democracy withstand the existence of capitalism to survive in ruling the world? Then number three, is there any best way of comparing socialism and education and democracy and education? Or what makes you think that education and democracy can in tandem, can go together, rather than socialism and education as a system of governing state? Thank you.
So you may reply to those questions, and then after that we go to Donna Pido because she's also raised her hand. But please, if you could respond to the questions raised by Afiz. Louise?
Yeah, thank you very much for this very, very interesting questions. I hope I'll be able to answer at least some of these questions. So for the first question, I'm not sure whether I understood it correctly, but democratic values, it depends a little bit on like the author or the study to which you're referring, but mostly it's also or connected or related to trust, but also to tolerance, to openness, like towards multiculturalism, for example. I'm not sure whether I understood the question, so maybe you can just repeat this first question again.
In a simple word, what is the value of democracy in governing state?
I don't know if everyone has the same issue, but I didn't understand it clearly just because of the connection.
I think you already answering it, because the values of democracy. So what are they? And you just mentioned a few: trust, openness, etc.
Yeah, tolerance. Is it about the individual values that are related to democratic or the support of democracy, or is it about the value of democracy as a concept?
Democracy as a concept.
Yeah, okay, then I got it incorrectly in the first place. Yes. Yeah, so I think this is a very difficult question because yeah, I think as researcher we cannot be completely neutral towards what we're researching on, and I'm personally convinced that democracy is a way of yeah, fighting oppression and guaranteeing human rights. But I know that there's a huge yeah, debate behind the controversy of external democracy promotion as neo-colonial projects, for example, and this is mainly justified first for the instrumental reason that democracy can lead, for example, to economic growth and then to the well-being of the humans, and for the normative argument that is also related to the theory of democratic peace, that democracy can also ensure peace and thus thereby the well-being of the populations. So this is basically, I think, what is from proponents of external democracy promotion, what they say is the value of democracy. For me personally, it's about the aspect of non-oppression. Yeah, but it's something that I definitely have to reflect in my research, because yeah, researching on external democracy promotion does not necessarily mean that I'm 100% convinced that the concept as such is a good one. But still, I have to take not like one or the other side, but it's difficult to also avoid this taking sides. Yeah. Then for the second question about democracy and capitalism, maybe you can also answer together with the question of socialism. It's again related to the position of yeah, or the idea of non-oppression or human rights, and I think I would totally agree that many of the logics of capitalism are in fact contradicting the idea of democracy and the liberation of the people, and especially in the context of Tanzania, this is very interesting because it is on a way to democratization, but it has a socialist past, so we have to deal with these different aspects. However, I'm still not sure how I can approach this, because what I'm currently thinking about a lot is about the epistemologies of the South and whether you're able to criticize external democracy promotion from within as a white researcher. And yeah, in the context of the global South, yeah. But the relationship between socialism and democracy and education as such is not a focus of my study, of course, because I'm yeah, definitely looking on how specific actors are using these concepts and not about this general idea. This would probably be a different work that I am doing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we go to Donna Pido, please? Donna, if you can hear us. I think she will join us when she's ready again. Oh, there is a question from, as Janet was clapping for you, Louise, for this wonderful reply and presentation for sure. And Janet, please, you may proceed with the question or comment.
Hello, Louise.
Hello.
Louise, hello, everyone. And it was quite comprehensive. It's clear you're well on your way to your project is very developed. And my first thought is that Afis is asking, in a sense, my paraphrase or understanding of Afis's question is a lack of clarity in your rationale for doing this study. And so why are you doing this study? What's meaningful for you? And what thread then will you pull, will sharpen your guiding question? Now, you have the disadvantage of being young and having to get a job where I'm old and I'm past that, so I can be more explicit about my views, which I work in peace education and my background is strongly in the Dewey and Freudian model, although I'm, do more. So I think that would be someone is speaking who's sound. Maybe Sakina has her own. So that's one thing, and I want to add this other component, which is learning. What kind of learning would be the outcome that you're looking for? Like defining democracy and why it's important and what kind of learning is being sought, like capacities, learning, understandings. And of course, the intentions are different for the different actors, I suppose, right? And that embodies the contradictions that you're going to, with luck, already, I think. So, okay.
Thank you very much for your comment. Yeah, it's still some work to do to be more explicit in the research question. I think for the political foundations, it still is on a very abstract level, and I'm not sure whether I will really be able to break it down, maybe for one paper, but not for the overall question, because I think the problem is really that these things are not thought together. That's why I want to bridge it, and I cannot bridge it by narrowing down, because then I will lose track of the idea of bringing it all together. But still, it is a problem also in the development of the categories, because it's so abstract, and then the categories also be very abstract. It is a huge work of interpretation then. But what I really find very interesting, or what is definitely very important part, is also the understanding of learning in the understanding of education. So what is their actual, what should people learn? Is it about the values? Is it about knowledge or information? And what kind of learning is understanding of learning? Is it more a conceptual thing or a cognitive development? Is very, very interesting. I'm not sure whether I'd be able to understand their concept or their understanding of learning, of the process of learning as such, but maybe more if it's an individual or a collective learning process.
I think your dissertation is a kind of mapping. And that's the real outcome, identifying the different actors, the different intentions, the different methodologies and forms. So that's about as far as you could hope to get. You've already done this massive laying out. And to just ground it somewhere with your intentions. But at the same time, you can't be overt so overt about that, I'm saying, because you're working for someone. You're hoping to get jobs. And in the very nature, as you said, it's donor driven, the studies. So for now, get your dissertation and be donor driven, but you can be sharpening your intention. Like, why do this? What's the point? What problem is trying to be solved here? Some people are promoting the value of democracy with a people-centric view, and others are using democracy to dominate, to take over, you know, a new form of colonization. So that's what you're struggling between those intentions. So
Yeah.
you might not get clarity. You might end up with mapping. But for you to be clear, that's I think what needs a little more underneath.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's fabulous what you did. Really awesome. So thank you for letting me talk twice.
Yeah, thank you very much for this second comment. May I just maybe add one more thing? Yeah, because I think like my standpoint was in the beginning that from the understanding of education and Bildung in the German sense, it has the potential to be best in line with real cooperation at eye level and real ownership, because it involves the other actors and it is able not to dominate people. But I want to understand if like the practices or the way people perceive their own practices is really in line with that. So this is my actual like the where I come from. But in fact, it's a lot about mapping also, because these actors are like their work is so fragmented, they don't know anything about each other. And it's also about making visible what is actually there, because they all pursue somewhat the same intentions, although they don't know anything about each other. And they can maybe also like, yeah, share good practices and avoid common mistakes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Donna, can you ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have three rather short comments. I'm sorry, I said two, but it's really three. I wanted to suggest to Louise that you don't mix apples and oranges. If you set socialism and democracy up as mutually exclusive, you're going to get into trouble. They are not. And my second comment is that one of the reasons that we're having so much trouble in the United States now with the efforts to establish an autocratic system is that something like 15 of our states in the 1990s decided that history and civic education were unnecessary. Yes, they're boring in the classroom, but people need to know the difference between the Constitution, the national government.
Is it only for me or is she gone? Also for the others?
I think she froze. If you could repeat that, Donna. It seems there was an issue there. She will, I think, join us when she's able to again. But as she put it, you know, socialism and democracy are not, you know, mutually exclusive. But I think she will come and complete her question or comment. So in the meantime, there is a question in chat. Just a moment. Yeah, from Eugene. Thanks for that wonderful presentation. You mentioned about learning and networking. Are you doing a phenomenological study, or are you also going to cultural democracy? The democracy we have in Africa is mostly valueless except profit. So the question is, are you doing a phenomenological study?
Regarding the research paradigm I'm following, I think I'm somewhere between like a social constructive, or in the realm of social constructivism and interpretivism. It depends on the sub-study that you're looking at, of course. And I think for the one dealing with the political foundations, it's mainly related from the epistemological and ontological background related to what's the word in English? Symbolic interactionism. That's the word. Yeah, I still have the German word in my head, and even in German, it's sometimes difficult to pronounce. So I'm not like. I think that it depends on your understanding of the phenomenological approach. I'm not that much into that. I think concerning the question of cultural democracy, I'm not sure whether I understand the relationship to phenomenological study. And I'm also not investigating the understanding of democracy in Africa, because I'm actually investigating on the German actors. They cooperate with different actors from the global south, and I also, as I said, talk to people from Tanzania. But my research interest lays on the political foundations, on the German actors, and not on what people think. Of course, this has to be related, otherwise there is a gap in effectiveness. But it's not the core of my research question.
Thank you for that explanation. Donna, can you join us again? It seems she's not ready yet. That's a shame, because she had 3 questions.
I'm here, but you can't hear me.
Oh, please proceed. Now we hear you. We hear you, Donna.
You can
please
hear me?
Go ahead.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
So,
very sure.
First I said, please don't do apples and oranges. What? You can hear me? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I mentioned that socialism and democracy are not mutually exclusive. That was just like a little nothing. Then I have typed in that my chapter entitled "Democracy as Falsehood: Seek but Do Not Expect to Find" just came out last week or 2 weeks ago in Reginald Odwar's edited volume entitled "Beyond Liberal Democracy in Africa." And my other comment that was interrupted when my sound went off is that I've forgotten that the problems we're having in America right now are connected in part to that removal of history and civic education from the K through 12 syllabus, engineered by the Republican Party. And if anybody wants to take an interest in looking at the history of the Republicans in America, you will discover that they are an elitist, they want to establish an aristocracy, and their meddling in democracy in the United States goes back at least as far as the beginning of Franklin Roosevelt's tenure in office, when they tried to prevent the establishment of Social Security. And let me not talk anymore. But please take a look at Reginald's book if anybody can get your hands on it. It's published by Rowman and Littlefield, which seems to be a subsidiary of Lexington Books, or Lexington is a subsidiary of Rowman and Littlefield. I don't know. That's all I have to say. I'll take my hand down.
Thank you so much. And please later on do share maybe if there is a link or something with us, and then we'll read it. Thank you very much indeed, Donna Pido, for that. And Louise, do you hear us? Can you hear me? Okay,
yes,
great. Yeah, if you wanted to say anything on that, to comment on Donna's.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much for the reading recommendation. As I said, I'm still working on my approach towards the not the conflict, but how to integrate global and global South and global North perspectives on democracy in the broader context of my research. So I think it's going to be very helpful to go through this reading that you just recommended. And I think concerning the exclusiveness of socialism and democracy, I think this was just kind of a language barrier, but I'm very grateful for this for correcting me in this regard.
Good. Yes, we still have some time for more questions and comments. Janet, would you like to say something more?
Yeah, well, something simple. You're in that terrible snowed-in place in your dissertation. I mean, it's beautifully mapped out, and it's so lonely, right? What do you want to ask us about what we understood from your presentation, or what, something like that? What questions do you have for us?
Yeah, so I actually prepared also some questions that I hid in my presentation. Yeah, the first question was basically towards the epistemology of the South. That was introduced also in the book of Sul Santos, and we'd already talked about that. But the other question is also from I'm actually not quite aware of who's here with us in the room, but from the different I just see that people are coming from all over the world. So do you have any experiences working in external democracy promotion, and what are the challenges you face? Because I think from these practices it's also very helpful, as I'm very lonely in this field, or feel very lonely, to take these experiences to go then with these experiences to a more abstract level.
Yes, as somebody who could give a response to that. Everybody is invited, of course, all the way from, let's say, Kenya and Tanzania and India and Germany and the US and Australia. Yeah, the world is big.
May I add something?
Yes,
I'm in
please.
Kenya, and I have a lot to say. I have a lot to say to Louise, but we're having an election 3 weeks from now, so I can't say anything. And as for writing your dissertation, just sit down and write out and then you'll have something.
Yeah, I think start writing is always a good advice.
To fool around with and edit.
Yeah, we have lost that last word, Donna, because of the connection, it seems. But yes, please start writing. That's that's the good advice.
Maybe because Ms. Gerson just wrote in the chat that you're avoiding USAID as best as you can. Can you maybe say a little bit more about that? Because research mainly deals with USAID and some are dealing with the political foundations, but as I said, not from a pedagogical perspective. And according to literature, sometimes it seems like the German political foundations are doing it better, in a better way than USAID, but I would rather question that.
Well, you know, NGOs are always in the crush. And the more developed the NGO gets, the more it needs big powers, money from big powers. So, you know, there are all these kind of glass ceilings or levels where you develop your work as an NGO or our Peace Education Center at Teachers College of Columbia, and then you hit the glass ceiling and you get snuffed out, unless you're making money or you're bringing money or, you know, so that's a question. And the United States has many ways to influence control in the government, but maybe the United States also has lots of money to help a country develop, you know, and so it's not just a clean, clear intention. You know, we all have to do things where we take money at times to, you know, to work, right? We take money to work, and then we work within the confines. So your dissertation has to be, you have to graduate first thing, work within the confines of this project, which is the value of your NGO. And then get out of school and get a job. And then, you know, gradually you can try to always to be doing good work. But let's see, the problem of democracy is a big problem. That's the other thing I want to say, as Donna is pointing out. We need this work in the United States as much, because what democratic mechanisms we have are greatly threatened now, and the threatening powers are only gaining power. And so, you know, so that's a problematic. How can you keep the value of the society as prominent and important to governance and in education? I mean, right now they're cutting the budget of New York City schools, which used to be the largest free public education system, I think, in the world. And, you know, it was really incredible in helping immigrants and all these different people really get an education and, you know, get more capacities and better place in society. And they're cutting it. So, you know, so we're on the defensive in that way, and your study is important to us. So keep going. I don't know if I helped you at all.
Thank you. I mean, like, I think I tried to separate my.
Yeah, please proceed, Louise. Yes.
Okay. What I just wanted to say is that I tried to separate my professional work for the NGO, which is really like, it's only 1 day per week. It's a really small job, and my academic research life. But I also see, and I think this is something that's going to be more interesting, let's say, in the coming years, if I'm approaching the end of my dissertation, because I have to find a job then, and I know that it's I'm not only like, it's also like I'm not pursuing a super critical, also not, I'm not like coming from the critical research paradigm, but still there is gonna be some critique, and yeah, it's I don't know, there's just a German saying which says, I'm swimming together with a lot of sharks, like in the Haifischbecken, and I have to see how this is gonna work out then after I have these findings, and how I can also bring them out to the world without destroying my professional future.
Yeah, there is a question in chat. Probably is from Professor Mishra, maybe. How do you think about democracy in future? We see that a leader position posing as a democratic leader easily can transition to autocracy. In the US, Trump was reluctant to leave office.
Yeah, good question. I think if we were able to answer that question, yeah, I mean, like, this is also the context of my research, seeing that there's a lot of democratic regression or autocratization in the world. And as I said, I'm still convinced that democracy can do a lot of good. It does not necessarily do so, but yeah, how we can prevent the democratic regression. We also have that, not to the same extent as in the US, but we also have that in Germany, is, I think, a task that every one of us as a citizen has to tackle, or it has to work with, not only as researchers. And I think, yeah, what I think about democracy in the future, against the background of Corona and the war, I don't see a very bright future, unfortunately, but I will do my best with my own, like with my research, but also as a person, to have a brighter future than I'm expecting.
Wow, thank you so much indeed, Louise, for this wonderful presentation. And I'm sure that the questions and comments have been very useful to you. And we wish you all the best, of course, in your thesis or your dissertation. And so thank you, everybody, for coming and for your participation. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a nice day, a nice night, nice morning, wherever you are. Ciao, ciao, bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your comments. It was really a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Understand.